Are we? Hey, we're on live. Yay, not a sentence. Hi. So, we are a small but mighty group discussing Godless.
I,
Bum,
I I don't have mine near me.
bum,
It's in
bum,
the
bum.
car.
So, this was a weird read. Oh, do we want to introduce ourselves? Hi, I'm Jennifer.
I'm Abby.
Hi, Abby.
I'm
Oh, I'm supposed to
Crystal.
mute myself, aren't I? Okay.
Hi, Crystal. Hi, Abby. Yes. Yeah, well, we can mute today. I don't think it'll be as big of a deal because there's only three of us, but we can. It's good to practice the muting. So by Pete Hautman. This one very much felt like it was set in the Midwest to me. So the basic summary of the book does anybody else want to summarize? You just want me to do it? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. So here I go. Um, the main character, Jason, is in high school and he's a little disenchanted with his parents' uh, belief system and is being forced to go to these religious classes. And as a response to that, and generally being kind of a teenage jerk, he decides to start his own religion, which is worshiping this water tower. And then it's like the distressing hijinks that ensue. That is the book. So it was interesting. So, general thoughts, impressions?
Crystal, it was your pick. You go first.
Yeah, I mean, it was my pick in that I pulled a bunch of stuff off of the shelves at the media center at school and was like, oh, this seems interesting and unlike anything that we've encountered before. And I think probably after having finished it, I would agree with it. It was interesting and kind of unlike anything that I had read before. I didn't love it. Um, and I also, from like a educator standpoint, and from someone who is religious, I also don't know. I'm having like weird mixed feelings about like recommending it to someone that's in middle school as well, because there are these like the hijinks that ensue are like, I don't know, it's weird. So that's kind of where I stand.
I would say definitely this is a high school book. I would not recommend this to middle schoolers. I mean, unless it's like do you mean like an eighth grader? Yeah, maybe. But like the, I'd say this is definitely. Is it shelved for your middle school books, or is it in your middle school media center? That's interesting. I would. This is like solidly young adult. Like this is teen to me. Where is it? Where did we put it? Yeah, X. It's got the little gold foil business for us. That means it's teen.
Abby, what do you think?
I actually read this book when I was in high school. It came out in 2004, so I probably read it when I was a sophomore or junior. I probably just picked it up off the like new teen shelf or whatever at the library. Um, and I realized that when you sent it to us, I was like, that cover looks really familiar. And then I read the like blurb and I was like, I think I've read this book before. So as I was reading it, I was like, oh yeah, this happens. Oh yeah, I wasn't predicting things, but I was like remembering them exactly as I read them. Um, I don't think I really liked it when I was in high school, and I didn't really like it when I read it again. I think that the main character is so kind of dispassionate that like you can't get invested in the story, whereas like and then the side characters aren't really given enough play in order to get really into what they're dealing with. And it kind of reminded me. I meant to look this up before we talked. I think it's a book called The Wave, which is supposed to be about like a high school that ends up having some kind of. It's like an they all have to wear like a symbol or something like that, and it's like supposed to be reminiscent of like Nazi Germany. Like everyone's kind of swept up in this whole culture, and it had a similar feel to me where it's like this is high school students dealing with this like big, huge, heavy philosophical topic that you're supposed to clearly have feelings about in any direction. And that book made me feel like a lot of feelings, and this book didn't really make me feel any feelings. So I thought that was just kind of like a missed the mark a little bit on what I think was trying to be accomplished in the book.
I think jumping off of one of the things that you said, Ab, I think that one of the things that really disappointed me about the book is there weren't any relationships that I could believe in. Like, the only friendship that I was kind of on board with was Jay and Shin in the beginning, but it doesn't build enough for us to care about it enough, or at least for me to care about it enough when, like, things go south and, you know, Shin has his psychotic break or whatever happens. Like, I didn't care about their relationship or any of the characters enough to be like, oh my goodness, what's happening? Like, I wanted to, but I just don't think that, like you said, none of the side characters get any kind of development. I don't even feel like Jay got enough development. Like, I just don't think that any of that happened enough for me.
I thought it's funny because I agree. I have the same kind of like disconnected feeling with the book, but the book still stressed me out. Does that, like, I still was like anxious about what was going on, but I didn't like anybody enough to really care what was going on at the same time. And then also I think that you're right. Like, the relationships were the beginnings of the relationships were poorly developed because you didn't get that it was a big deal that they weren't talking and that he kind of Jason abandoned his friend that he had for forever because you didn't, and like what, and I didn't see the point in the third kid, like the normal guy that you like don't remember. I actually just forgot about him until just now, so I did not remember him because he was too normal.
The bully guy?
No, not the bully guy, like the little wiry guy. He was actually,
Oh.
I would have rather the one that was like, if you see a normal looking guy, or no, like where he takes all of the pictures of people and makes them one person and it looks like him.
Was it the guy whose dad was a pastor or something?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I thought that he was like, if you had made this into a play, you would have cut that character.
I totally forgot about him until you just said
like, right? He like didn't exist. But which I guess was it felt like that was like the author's point for him, that he was forgettable, but I was just like, I don't need to know. Like, it just didn't. I guess maybe he wanted to have a character who like rediscovered their faith because of it, and that was the one that they went with. I felt like that's the function that he played, but it didn't work because you didn't remember him. So like that part of the storyline just didn't work.
Or he needed to play it up a little bit more, because after everything went down, the only time that you saw him was when they're like briefly working together picking up trash on the side of the road, and where it's like, no, this is blasphemy and you need to stop. And I was like, oh, okay, so like, this guy is like back to being real Lutheran or whatever he is, you know what I mean? Like, but again, if any one of these relationships was entered into and developed a little bit more, because even Henry, even like the bully kid, that was the first where I was like, I don't know, you're gonna punch him in the face one day and now you're just gonna chill in his room.
He seemed like he liked him more than his actual friend, the bully kid.
Yeah, and again, if that had maybe been explored a little bit more, where it was like he was sitting in his room and they bonded over these sci-fi novels and all this different stuff, but like that was never entered into again. I don't know. It just, everything kind of just grazed the surface.
There wasn't enough time. Like the mold spores were in there, but they weren't given enough time to become grown-up mold. Like none of it grew. Like,
what a metaphor.
Curtsy.
I talked to Kim about it on the phone the other night. We were talking, and I was just like, oh, I'm bummed that you're not going to be able to be there. And so we chatted about it, and she really felt the same way, and really strongly disliked the main character, really strongly felt that the like token girl was just like totally the worst thing ever, the worst
The
character
most
ever.
token of token girls. Like she was like, I'm just something for you to be sexually interested in this novel. Like that is my point. It's
From
like kind
all
of
of you to be sexually interested in.
because
Every
that's the
single
function that the girl
dude.
plays.
And for
And
us to maybe have another reason to kind of feel bad for this main character guy, because in the end he doesn't get the
he's
girl.
such a bozo. I was glad.
Well, and also because he like is so offended at his friend zonedness. Like he's just like go for me. Ugh. Like he's so
But
awful.
he's not even like nice guy TM because he's not nice. And I get that that's the point is that like nice guy capital N capital G's end up not being nice guys, but he's not even initially fake nice in order to like earn the title.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think he was not. Well, he was. Yeah, he just. The most interesting. The only really. So I did think that a set of relationships that I really liked the interplay in the relationship between him and his parents. That they were just like, and the dad was like so frustrated, like with his like the interplay for like their faith where he was like you need to like you're being punished and so you're going to read these books and we're going to talk about them and like I actually liked their dialogue. I thought it was like really meaty and interesting.
That's a good punishment for what he did because his dad's like, I want you to understand what you're dealing with. Maybe to give a more well-rounded selection of books would have been better, but it's not just like, hey, you did this dumb thing. It's like, hey, you did this dumb thing, and here's some context for why it was dumb and like why people are offended by it.
I would love to do, I don't actually want to do this, but I think it would be really interesting to do like a what should have the recommended reading list been? Like that would be a super funny, like if I cared about this book enough, that would be a fun like reader's advisory thing to do. But I don't think I cared enough and I don't yeah, no. Yeah.
There were a couple of the other thing that I found interesting and that I liked was the their like Genesis story at the start of the chapters, which I initially, I'll be honest, just like skipped. I read the first one and then I skipped it until it got to the point where Shin was writing it, and then you realize that that's what it was all along. And then I went back and I reread all of them. I'm like, ooh, this. I think I would have enjoyed reading this book more. This
That's
like
what Kim and I were talking about. Like,
vaguely biblical, and not actually even vaguely biblical, like very biblical. And I'm curious. Okay, in typical Crystal fashion, I just finished the book. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to go back and my copy, and I don't know if yours does as well, probably has like a guide for educators and like an author's purpose. But I'm just wondering if the purpose of this, from the author standpoint, maybe you guys can weigh in, was it's okay to question, or I don't know. I don't know whether this was like a super religious person, because there was a lot of, in this fake religion, there was a lot of still Christian, there's still a Christian through line, even if it wasn't about Jesus. You know what I mean? So I'm
Well,
wondering if that was
I
supposed
think
to be the takeaway, or I don't
I
know.
think I think the author definitely that was the backbone. They at least have a background in that from like an education standpoint, whether or not it's their belief system and what their intent was. Like I think the backbone of it was totally, you nailed it. Like that's where they were pulling all of the religious parts for the water tower gods, which I just loved. And it felt very like what is it, War of the Worlds? Like that's what they felt like to me. But yeah, I think I would have actually loved to have very nice, Crystal. I would have loved to have read this book, not just like his writings, but from Shin's point of view. Like that would have been an amazing, hopefully, and like really interesting, because he's such an interesting character with the snails, and then he abandons them as their god, and I was like, the snails. That I was stressed about. I was so stressed about the snails.
Kim and I spent about 45 minutes pitching alternate ways that this story could have like been similar but better. So anything I say in that vein could have been mine or could have been hers. I don't remember whose, but that was one of them, like reading it from Shin's point of view. Or even just if Jason had initially, um, he did it as sort of like a, oh, I'm just being a dick in my Bible studies class. It wasn't like he ever was invested in it, and it would have been more interesting, I think, to have him be really invested in it, see that it's like messing people up, and then back away from it. Because in Bible study, if he had brought up in the like youth group or whatever, hey, instead of worshiping something that we don't see or whatever, we have to have all this blind faith. Here's something that's tangible that literally is providing for us right now, and like latch onto that as a more accessible way of doing, like, of having a religion. And then you would have been more also invested in the fake religion, I feel like, if there had been a little bit more. And I think that's what those Bible passages at the beginning of the chapter were kind of supposed to be, like, cluing you into. But it's like, until you realize kind of that it's Shin writing them, you I skipped them too until that point, and I read back. So that was another reason we were like, maybe if he had been a little bit more. Also, if maybe more than just like 6 of them had gotten into it, if it had like spun into a whole town frenzy or something like that, instead of like, these 6 bozos are doing some shenanigans.
Is bozo your word for this book? Are they just, is it the bozo book?
Yeah, they're a whole bunch of bozos.
That is
And I
like the
also,
most old man response to that. I love it.
I also wonder what would have happened if like any adult had been on board. Like I thought about that too. I was like, what if, and I think kind of building off of what you were saying, Abby, if if it was more of a town frenzy, if it was more than just this like tiny like gaggle of teenagers, um, I wonder, if there had been some kind of power of persuasion, if I don't know. I just think that maybe that could have been a more interesting place to take it.
Do you think that the point for the having well, okay, so having Jason and then also having Fighter Kid, what is his name? The little wiry guy.
Henry? An
Oh
H maybe? H name?
no, bully guy is Henry.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So bully guy. So Jason and Henry, like having them be like powerhouse, like Henry starts his own little sect of the religion and like breaks off, but neither of them actually believe in it. I actually thought that was like interesting, like religious structure commentary. Do you know what I mean? Like that, and that
Or
Jason
like
is,
specifically kind of cult leader commentary.
and how well like and how like it's about, do you know what I mean? Some of that is, it's about power and it's about the amount of do you know what I mean? Like it's not about, it's about getting the girl. You know what I mean? It's not about at all the religion, whereas the purist just completely goes off the deep end. The I really liked how they ended up inside of the water tower. I thought that was a cool, like, do you know what I mean? That they were suddenly inside of this thing that they were worshiping, quote unquote, but like they were like inside of this, and that the only person that wasn't was Shin, and so he like, that was, do you know what I mean? And that was the beginning of his little spiral downward. I thought that parts of it were really, really interestingly composed. Like I thought it was like the bones of it were really interesting for the story, but the main character was so tough to get around.
That's the part of the book that gave me the most anxiety, is when they were all in that water tower. I'm like, I mean, I was also eventually stressed out about the snails too, and the lack of water.
Wasn't to say that I was not stressed out at all about the snails. Oops.
Well, I think probably I was more stressed out about the snails because that's how you knew that like all of this with Shin was very real. Like this kid is
And
actually.
because snails died. I am really upset about the deaths of the snails, and both of you are terrible people.
and because the snails died, also because it meant that this teenager was really having a breakdown, because this is something that was very, very important to him. Like next level important to him, and he just completely abandoned it and became so absorbed in whatever this fake situation was, which, could also be a commentary for teens or middle grade or, whoever, about getting so wrapped up in whatever you're doing, perhaps, because that happens a bunch in that age. But yeah, the water tower, when they're all in the water tower, and then the flashlight drops, I was like, oh no. It's like someone's done. Someone's done for. That's
That
how
could
this.
be a very different book very quickly.
Well, that's what I thought, that they were going to kill the kid that no one thought about, because he was in there, and I was like, well, he's clearly the red shirt, like he's going to die, and then everyone else will learn a lesson from his death, because the other ones have shit to do. Like there's stuff going on in the rest of this book for the bully and for the girl, I guess. But like I was very convinced that he was going to die, but I wasn't like upset about it. I was just like waiting for it to happen, and when it didn't, and when spoilers, I mean, we're just talking about the whole book at this point. When Henry fell off of the water tower, I was also disappointed that he survived. Like, I thought that it didn't, like, I felt like it pulled back from what could have been like an interesting, especially if he hadn't, like, because Jason didn't like really learn anything at the end of this book. He was just like, everything is garbage and I'm bored. Like that was his like end thing where he was, but like I appreciated that he was like, what the last line is, that he was like jealous of his father's face, but he also didn't like, and I would have liked it if he didn't learn anything and someone died, but save the snails, okay? Save the snails.
So I read this book right around the time, or actually a little bit after I would have been making my confirmation. And so I think I was very much more interested in it when I was reading it in high school, because so I'm Catholic. The main character in the book, or I'm the whatever. We're going to put some loose air quotes around that. I was raised Catholic, and the main character in the book is like very Catholic. Although it did feel, I don't know, it didn't feel Catholic-y to me. It felt more some kind of, like more, like you were saying, more Midwestern.
Well, yeah, it felt very Midwestern. I'm wondering if that definitely, because it felt like, I actually looked up some of the stuff, and I was like, is this where I live? Like I was like, is this set? Because it doesn't say like like it gives the town name, but it doesn't give the state or anything. I don't think. And I was just like, and since I'm fairly like new, again, lots of air quotes today. I'm like new-ish to this area, and so I was like trying to figure out if it was like set in like Wisconsin or possibly in Indiana. But it felt like a very, I have Catholic family members, and then I was raised Lutheran, so it was very, the flavor of it felt more Lutheran than Catholic to me.
That's what I was thinking too, actually. A little
like
bit more.
Like the ceremonial pomp was not there.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there didn't seem to be like a tie. What? Is there a ghost? What
Coffee.
happened?
Sorry, coffee just
It froze and then it unfroze and you had a Starbucks.
Magic.
But when we had to do our confirmation, part of it was we went on like a full day retreat, like all of us 8th or 9th graders or whatever, and they had like a priest talk to us all day. It was thrilling. The best way to spend a weekend. But they got this guy who was like 1,000,000 years old, and he was like, and women shouldn't really work, and Britney Spears is pornography. And so we all went home and we're like, do we need to do this?
Not for me. Yeah.
And all of our parents were like, oh, no. You just like listen to him, and then you go to church, and then you kind of decide which of these things applies to you, and then like ignore the rest in case you want like to get married in a church and have your grandparents come and stuff like that. So that's pretty much what at least my parents and like some of my friends' parents after that experience, because we all were ready to defect after that.
So it was like take it down a notch, kids, practical Catholicism for you and yours. Like that's really cute, actually.
Yes, the big thing that I remember him saying that was that Britney Spears was pornography, and I was like, ooh, okay.
We can look at her on the library computer, so it doesn't work.
I don't know. The whole the youth pastor, Just Al, he that felt very like new agey church. Like we have several large in this area, like several large like newer churches that have like full auditoriums with like a full, and it felt more like that than, I guess probably because my association with Catholic Church is very like very traditional, like you said, very ceremonial, a much more traditional church setting. So even just as he's describing those youth group meetings, like that didn't feel Catholic
Yeah, I don't know
either.
how much actual discussion of faith goes on at Catholic youth groups. I think it's more like bring some canned goods and then hang out with your friends and then like maybe go on like an overseas mission trip or something. But I don't think it's as, I also think that like just in my experience, Catholic people aren't like questioning like it's not, you don't like talk about it as much. It's just like, yep, okay, that's it. Like, you know what I mean? Unless it's not as discussion based. I'll say that. Because you're like, this is it, and this is kind of like, this is our ceremony, and this is what we go do, and we say these things, and it's very rote, and it's very ceremonial, but it's not as like, and this is how I feel about it. There's no like feelings involved.
Um, I think that another way that this book could have been better was and I think we've kind of touched on this, but like a much clearer juxtaposition between his religion, his invented religion, and the religion he was brought up in. So I think that if there was maybe more of these youth group meetings, or talk more about, you know, what sitting through Sunday service felt like for him, or, and you know what I mean, if it kind of maybe gave us more as to what was going on and how this character really felt about things, other than, because you can't tell from what we're given, the information we're given about Jason, whether he's just like bored and angsty, or if he's really like, no, I fundamentally and like existentially and just have a problem with religion, you know. So I think maybe exploring that a little bit more would have made it interesting.
I think that was the conclusion he had by the end of it, was that he fundamentally and existentially had a problem with I think that's kind of where he got to by the end of it, where he was just like that was it. Like maybe I'll start another cult someday, but only because I clearly have that skill set and it's a tough economy. Do you know what I mean? Like that's like why he would make the decision to run another religion. But I liked the you didn't I actually and I the it wasn't clear on my initial. I only read the book once, and not like it was a fairly deep read, but part of it was in a car, so I may have missed stuff. The you don't know what the religions are of the other kids. Like you don't, like, you know that she is in the youth group with him, but you don't know what's going on with Henry. I mean, I think you're maybe supposed to assume that his family is not practicing anything because they don't talk about it. But does Shin go to the same church as him? Because he's writing the religious doctrine. And so, like, I really wanted to know what his background was, because he was, like, they don't talk about that, though. Do they? Like, I'm trying to, like, I can't think of any instance.
I don't think so. I thought the characters were so superficially drawn that there wasn't anything really to latch onto there. In terms of having knowledge about their, like, each character's inner life, there was, like, hardly anything.
Boo. Because that also would have been interesting to see how, like, the different, like, even if it was all just Christianity, the different denominations and where that impacted their feelings about the water tower, or their interpretations of him. Because I feel like that would have made the bully character, the Henry bully character, much, like, that would have given him, he seemed like he had, like, a very like, he was very intriguing, like, in how he interacted with the different, like, he was very conscious of, like, needing different masks and to interact with people different ways, and, like, how Jason was perceptive of that when he came and was like, oh, he wants us to like him, this is a weird side of him I've never seen. I think it would have been interesting to have an explicit religion tied to him and have that also, or not one at all, and have that be influencing how he was interacting with this new religion. I thought that, and I think they could have played with it from the token, like from our token girl. Like, she was coming from a place of
Can
like
we
this.
look her name up, please? I feel bad.
Oh, look, my Benedict Cumberbatch. I was wondering where my bookmark was. Yeah, Magda. Magda, because she's Mary Magdalene.
I straight up thought it was Catherine. My guess was going to be Catherine. That's how little I paid attention to that book. Wait, Magda was in the youth group, I thought.
Yeah, she is. She has
That's
like,
not the main girl, is it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Magda's the main girl.
Magda. Oh boy, I didn't even. I usually at least have the initial right because that's how I keep track of names.
Magda sitting with her back to the ladder railing. Flash, she's in the water tower with them. That's where Benedict was.
All right,
Benedict would not lie to us.
Okay.
But she, she was, but they didn't let her engage with the religion. Like, she was very, like, she didn't make an impact on it. And I think her response and why she was interested in this would have been interesting to explore. And he just didn't. The author just didn't. Which, length and some of the, like, I would not recommend this to middle schoolers unless you know them, obs. But like the size of it felt like a juvenile book. It felt like a middle grade book.
It's so short. It's so short.
Is that because of when it came out though? Because it was like mid Harry Potter and like realistic fiction. It was only fantasies that were getting length at that point.
I really think so because I remember just like ripping through stuff then. Like I would go home with stacks of books like that and just like, you know, like rip through them in a weekend. I don't think you were getting the like adult length YA books.
Well, and I am a fervent believer, worshiper of Tamara Pierce. Like, I'm a big fan. And her books, the fantasy books, like, and now she's writing like significant, like they're big and they're still separated into multiple volumes, but hers were initially these very thin, skinny paperbacks were what I checked out of the library. But they were clearly all the same book. Like, if you read it, that was one arc. Like, that was one story. And that's how she was getting around that publishing thing, is she was like, well, I'll just break it up and there'll be like a tiny little resolution to keep reading the rest of the series. The publishing change was, I think like timing wise, yeah, you're right. I think it's just that they weren't being published at that length. Do you think stuff was cut out then? Like, do you think it was trimmed to be this length? Or do you think it was just never developed?
Let's be nice to, what's his name? And say, yeah. I don't have the book with me. I'm sorry, I'm the worst.
Pete. His name is Pete.
Pete. This is a little nitpicky, but Jason is not charismatic enough to be a cult leader.
Agreed.
It does kind of just feel like everybody is just like, oh yeah, okay. Or they, for some reason, express interest. Again, he doesn't have to do any recruiting. Like, he's just kind of like, oh yeah, I do this thing. And they're like, okay, I want to be part of that. Like, there is no...
Or does his inner monologue is not charismatic enough. But do you think he's got poor self-esteem? Do you think that he, I mean, he's not a super, like, I think he's a fairly reliable, I think he's a fairly reliable narrator because he's not engaged with any of it, so he doesn't have a reason to skew any of it. But I think that, I'm wondering if he is not accurate in regards to himself.
Oh, like he's self-deprecating in his...
Like, I'm fat and I'm huge and nobody could ever be interested in me. You know?
Whereas all of these people do seem super interested in him. Yeah.
Well, I guess thinking back on it, he was such a jerk in those youth group meetings. But like when you're a teenager and someone's just like putting forth that aggressive of a personality, you're like, oh, that's a person. Like there's some kind of... I'm not articulate.
Oh, that's the person.
I am not articulate.
This one, sorry, so I popped onto his website quickly because there's a whole bunch on the back cover. I was like, look at all these other books, and I was wondering if any of them involved the same characters. I was like, oh, maybe we do get Shin's story in one of these other books. But no, it looks like they're all kind of just one up. Looks like a two-part series maybe, but the rest are just standalone. Um, but this book won an award. It was like a Minnesota. I literally just read it and now have already forgotten.
Minnesota. Now it's said Minnesota.
Yeah, it was a Minnesota Book Award winner. So I don't know, that makes me think that perhaps that's where this author's from more.
Yeah, sometimes and sometimes that's what it's the not to say like this, and also like we're reading this more than 10 years later. Like I feel like young adult fiction has like evolved and the publishing standards have adjusted. So I think if he wrote this now, it would be a different response, and it would be a different response to things because we're also reading this with like a what's going on with religion and with Christianity in America, and like we're reading that with this lens as opposed to like this was written right after the Columbine shootings, wasn't it? Like that's what this, and like there was that fear of, wasn't it? When did that happen? Hold on. But there was that like fear of like teenagers having a cult. Like that was like a big thing when.
So that was 1999.
Yeah.
So that's like 5 years later.
But probably.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say probably still relevant enough here. But it's true. It is interesting I guess for 2004 even, like he pretty like casually throws out some like terrorist language, like he uses the phrase terrorists, and there was something else in here where I was like, ooh, that's icky. And even in 2004, I feel like again, I was like, maybe just in this moment, obviously with everything that's going on in the world, I'm feeling particularly sensitive to this language. But in 2004, I would imagine it would be a similar feeling.
How do you guys deal with that? Specifically when like I don't know, like I might recommend this to somebody like at some point. Like I think it's an interesting and it's a unique title, and it's a good one to like have read in your back pocket, and I would not have read it if we hadn't as a group. So I'm glad that I read it because I think it was interesting. But how do you guys deal with when you know that the book is right for the reader, but there's like baggage with it where you're like, oh, it's written in the 90s and they didn't really understand computers, like because I have that with a couple of fantasy series where I'm just like, yeah, she thinks she's a hacker because she knows how to put in a password, and you just have to like deal with that and let it happen, go forward. Like, but like when it's like, and that's one thing, and you can like make light of that because it's, you know, old people and technology, but like, which is very approachable. But like, how do you guys deal with that?
I feel like like I said in the very beginning, I feel like I don't know that I'd be quick to recommend this book. First of all, because I teach in a middle school. Second of all, just as a public school teacher in general. It's funny, some of the ELA teachers have shared, like they have shelves and shelves of books in their rooms, and they make, again, because they're teachers, and I guess it would be different than our library media specialist. They will sometimes, if there's a student that wants to borrow a book from them, they have to send something home and have their parents sign it to make sure it's okay. And it used to just be, one of the English teachers I was talking to was like, it used to just be one section. I had one section of books that were a little bit advanced, that had some mature content, and I would recommend that students could go and kind of browse those, but they always had to be signed off by a parent. She goes, now I do it for any book, because there were parents that I guess were upset. One of the summer reading books was Miss Peregrine, and there were parents that were upset about that because of the supernatural and whatever. So I just feel like my position as a public school teacher, unless I know the kid and know the family well enough to know that it's going to be received appropriately, I don't know for a book like this that I would go out on a limb for. If it was a book that I liked more, that I felt a connection with and that I felt was really important, that might be worth even a phone call to a parent or talking to, someone at home about it or something along those lines. But for this particular book, I wouldn't put myself out there for it.
I think that what comes up for me more with the middle grade set is if you're reading a book, there are a lot of really good middle grade books from like the 60s and or 70s. I'm thinking of Half Magic, and I can't. I'm thinking of Half Magic. I'm thinking of a book that I read that was like my mom's maybe or something. I read it at my grandparents' called Key to the Treasure. Some of the Nancy Drew books and stuff have some wildly outdated racial stereotypes, and it's just the kind of thing where you're like, do I recommend it with a disclaimer that ooh, this was written in a time when it was acceptable to talk like that, or do I find an updated book that's of a similar ilk but is not going to have that kind of baggage along with it?
It's just a tough line to, well, because also I feel because you both were fairly voracious readers growing up, and it's hard to dump out that back catalog, especially when a kid will connect with a book the same way you did, or you hope that they will. Excuse me, or you hope that they will, because but when you read it again, you're like, well, they're using really terrible offensive terms, or they thought they were being super progressive and they're not even a little, or they were for the time maybe, but though now it's not so much. I just think it's just tough to not have.
Isn't there a Newbery contender this year that's been sparking a lot of that conversation? Yeah.
The Blackberry.
Oh, I was thinking of a chapter book. It's about a girl. I'm thinking in the Samantha American Girl era. That's how I keep track of historical fiction.
I love you. I think you're just the best. I just never change. That's a beautiful. Is it because of the accessories? Is that why you're
I'm gonna look it
remembering?
up. No, I just I know the settings and the costumes and stuff, so I can do it based on cover art and a little blurb of where it takes place, kind of when it takes place.
The Samantha, so as a sideways bit of trivia, the house that Samantha lived in visually was modeled off a house near, right next to the town that I grew up in, and it's super pretty because she was a rich white girl in the early 1900s, and so the house is beautiful gingerbread adorableness. So
Oh, sorry, I just looked it up because I felt I needed to. So it's called the Hired Girl, and I've read a lot of blog posts about it because there's some language about race and maybe privilege that are very in keeping with the time, but it's are the middle grade readers going to realize that it's in context with keeping with the time, or are they going to read it as are they going to understand the context or not? Was kind of the question.
To engage with it or just absorb it?
Yes, exactly.
And this is, to get off into a social studies rant, this is one of the things that makes me really, it's frustrating in my job as it stands right now, because I spend a lot of time teaching reading and writing skills, which are very important. I'm not saying that reading and writing skills are not important, but it's taken away from some of the actual content, some of the actual history. So one of the things that I fear with middle grades and even high schoolers is that they lack the background knowledge necessary to be able to contextualize the text in that way. Just because it's not the focal point in our classroom anymore. Yes, I am teaching history. Ultimately, I am teaching history. There are historical things that they are learning, but the focal point, and especially in the middle grades, has really shifted to a more skills-based curriculum. And part of that stems from the fact that these students will never know a time where they can't look up whatever they need to know in their pocket. But the problem is that they really are entering into anything else, whether it's literature, whether, what have you, without that background. So I don't know. I don't know that they'd be able to grasp that or understand that.
Do you do like a unit on like information literacy, like where like the validity and evaluating sources? Like, is that part of the curriculum? Like, not that you won't like. I'm not saying that you won't do that, but is that set up in your curriculum?
Yes, and that's one thing that I will say that at least in my district that the social studies curriculum really reinforces, starting in 6th grade and moving throughout, and that's actually in partnership with the library media specialist or whoever in your building, or at least for me. Generally, I work really closely with our library media specialist to make sure, because she has a whole wealth of information that I don't even have, and she also, her familiarity with the resources that are available to our school in terms of databases and things like that, she's really good at being able to direct the kids in a really meaningful way. But yeah, those are skills that we teach and reinforce because those are, again, going to be really important.
So general, we made it the whole hour with just 3 of us, which I'm not surprised about because we're chatty. But
I was just going to say we're chatty. That was what I was going to butt in with.
General wrap-up thoughts about Benedictine Godless. I wish it was close enough that he could be in the water tower. I wish that the perspective of the water tower was slightly different. Oh well. So general thoughts.
I just wish, again, a lot of the things that we focused on throughout this whole hour, just those little tweaks, the things that I think would have taken, what made this sound so compelling when you read the back of the book. In terms of, I think that it could have gone a lot of places and just fell short. I don't know. So I just wish that it was just slightly different.
Yep. Interesting concept, disappointing outcome, but that's okay. Definitely worthwhile.
I liked that it engaged with like a young kid coming to terms with religion, and it didn't have him landing on the side of coming back to his religion. I thought that made him a fairly unique character. You don't like a lot of what I'm like paying attention to is like for a lens of like my homeschool group who are wanting religious aimed books, but that reinforce their belief system. Do you know what I mean? That's like if you want your kids to read something, it makes sense. But I like that this was coming from an opposing perspective and from an opposing character. But yeah, I think that there were definitely issues with the book. I agree that there were lots of issues with the book. I probably would recommend this to somebody, but it would have to be like a special reader. It wouldn't just be like I wouldn't ever include it on like a general list of something, I don't think. So that's how we all felt. So I think that we did miss our Mylene and our Kimpo today because they had other engagements, because it's December, because oh dear Lord, it's December already. The next book that we are reading, where are you? It's called Skeleton Creek by Patrick Carman. Are we all okay with? Are the 2 of you guys okay with doing that one?
I'm down.
Is that the scary one?
Yeah.
It's scary.
It's a scary one.
Mm-hmm.
Abby and I are gonna have to hang out and read it together in the daylight.
Good. Make the plans.
Spooky.
The I'm gonna try and do the ebook version of it because Kim was saying that the chapters end with like there's from that the next title are seeded with like website, like it's an interactive book, I think is what she was saying. So I think I'm gonna try and do the ebook version of it to see if those are like hyperlinks to see what them. And so I'll also ask.
Fancy.
I'm also gonna evaluate it on that.
Mm-hmm.
I usually try and do a different format. This book wasn't available as an audiobook though, so I actually had to read it.
I was wondering that.
I couldn't find it. It might have been recorded at some point, but my library system and Overdrive did not have it available. So, and that's about as far as my exploration to find it went. Because we had the actual book. But I'll do the ebook and see how, what's the word? Where it's like melded together, integrated. How well the digital elements are integrated into it, because I think that's interesting. That's my plan. I promise nothing.
I'm just making faces now.
Do it. All right, I'm going to take us off the air. Thank you guys for listening. We will be back at some point in either January or February. I'm going to hedge my bets. January or February. Bye!